You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host, Mike Levitt.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, my name is Mike Levitt, and this is And If Love Remains. We are here with a special guest. First of all, I need to acknowledge our co-host and lovely ambassador of music, Elias Axel Pedersen. Welcome.
I'm lovely now. That's awesome.
Yes,
Thanks.
you are lovely.
I'll take it.
And we have a great guest on. We've had him on before. He's a good friend of the program. It is Brett Leonard. Brett is the owner of BLP Audio and the director of music and technology programs at University of Indianapolis. He's also the chief audio engineer at the Chelsea Music Festival. Welcome again, Brett. We love having you.
It's great to be back.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah, I'm excited.
So one of the things that we were just talking about off the air is a new project that you've been working on. And so let's just jump right in. You know, we had there's been a couple of years of festivals not happening, concerts not happening.
Yep.
Lots of downtime, people working in studios if they had that luxury. And you guys for the first time had the Chelsea Music Festival back up and running. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and kind of what the focus was for that?
Yeah. It's been wild. For 2 years, we released a lot of sort of greatest hits archive footage from past festivals, and then generated 2 new virtual festivals, sort of short, usually 4 to 5 programs, some of which were recorded, especially the first one was recorded all over the world. So that was kind of wild. I was getting calls from Australia in the middle of the night, and then the next day getting a call from Germany because a guy was recording there, and sort of trying to piece it all together. But we're finally back in person. We did kind of it was weird. It was more than a half festival. It was only 5 days of programming, but there was like 7 events or something in those 5 days.
Wow.
So we really packed it in. Everyone was super excited to be back. So how
was the energy? Like, were the performers and the audience a little nervous, or was it great energy? Like, how did you feel about
everyone was so excited. I mean, the applause when the artistic directors came out just to welcome everybody was like a minute and a half long. Like, people were just so excited to be back, and like see people actually making music. It was really great. And, cool. Depending on where you are, I know like in Indiana, things picked up with reduced attendance and whatnot a lot earlier than some places. And in New York, it's pretty recent that they're getting back to full-size audiences. So it was really fun. And we did some new venues this year, which was really exciting.
Cool.
Annie Leibowitz's old photo studio and residence, which was a taxi repair yard, is now this event space in Chelsea, kind of on the west side, Midtown West area. And so we did some shows there, which was really interesting. It's kind of this cool old peaked roof and lots of old school, really kind of uneven brick, and, a really cool vibe to the place. So,
oh, that's cool.
How hard is that to record in? It sounds like it would be very echoey, but I don't know.
Ooh, yeah, it was a little, we had to be a little choosy with where we were putting mics for sure. It was tough. And it was, since they were an event space, it was great. They had speakers and lighting already there and projection already there.
Nice.
But all of that grid was below the lowest level of the peaks in the roof, or the sort of stop point of the peaks, and then the seating was raked, so you put mics up and they'd be like all these crazy shadows and things
Oh.
because the grid was so low. So we got a little interesting. I had an awesome team though this year. I had two of my former students who have been with the festival before, and I just casually mentioned to them, they both have jobs and gigs and whatever, and they were like, I think I could take some time and come back. So it was like this
That's
reunion
awesome.
too. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Cool. Well,
That's nice.
just so just to kind of make us all, including me, aware, like talk a little bit about the festival itself. Like, what is the focus? Just maybe a little history on the Chelsea Music Festival, and what are they trying to do there?
Yeah. So the festival was started. I think this was our 13th season. And the festival was started by Ken David and Melinda Lee Mazur. And they are both obviously musicians. Ken David is a conductor. He just, I believe, finished up his assistant conductor time with the Boston Symphony, and he's the artistic director of the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra and the principal guest conductor, I think, for the Leipzig Orchestra, or I don't know. He's all over the place. And his wife, Melinda, is a phenomenal pianist. She runs the piano portion of the Boston University Tanglewood Institute every summer, and just both incredible musicians. And it was kind of this two-pronged thing. They really love visual arts and culinary arts as well. So they wanted to try to find a way to merge visual, culinary, and musical arts. And they wanted to do it in a way, because there's such a strong sort of hard stop to the American orchestra season. And then there's usually a week or two before summer programs start picking up. So they really targeted that early to mid-June, when people are usually between those seasons. And so they built the whole festival as combining these three art forms, and then being able to bring in these amazing artists who are kind of like, yeah, I'll come hang out in New York for a week between all of these other major commitments. So it started on the roof of the Chelsea Art Museum in New York.
Wow.
And that doesn't even exist anymore. The Art Museum doesn't exist anymore. And but it started, I think, 2 days. It was a Saturday, Sunday. They did 2 shows on Saturday and 1 on Sunday. And now it has grown into a typical season is about 10 days long, with a few days of prep and rehearsal, and maybe a couple of days of recording spread in more recently. But there's usually a show every day, and then 2 or 3 days there will be like noontime outdoor concerts or events geared towards families and children. And then there'll be late night events that a lot of times are like spin-offs on classical works, where maybe a jazz artist or an electronic artist has sort of re-envisioned some piece of classical music. And so it's a really, really cool organization. And then, there's an artist who might be inspiring work or might be creating work inspired by the music. And there's a culinary artist who might create a tasting menu or a meal that's based around the music. And so it's just this kind of all senses involved experience.
How is that? I'd be very curious to taste a meal based on a piece I'm listening to or watching. That'd be really cool.
It's incredible. Yeah. We've had these incredible culinary artists. The one I always think of is Lance Nitahara, who was one of the winners of the show Chopped.
That's a good show.
He was just, besides being the nicest human being I've ever met, he was just a wonderful human being. But I think that's the best food I've ever had in my entire life. It was incredible.
Wow.
He just made me a plate of something at the end of the night one night because I hadn't eaten in 8 hours or whatever, and it was incredible. It was amazing.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, sounds like a great experience. Can anybody just get tickets? I mean, is it you have to buy season tickets? Can you go to one night? Can you watch a show?
Yeah. There's a whole variety of options. A lot of times they'll do single tickets, or if there's a normal evening show and then a late night show that's one of these kind of spin-offs, they'll do either or you can buy a package with both shows in a day, or you can obviously do season tickets as well. And It's just chelseamusicfestival.org. But the cool thing is, if you want to get a visual and auditory taste of the festival, you won't quite be able to literally taste it, but there's quite a lot of past performances, and then some of these virtual seasons on YouTube primarily, but across all of our social media, which is really, really cool. You know, you can go back and see these incredibly special moments. One of the first videos that I think we released publicly was one of the Brandenburg concertos with this phenomenal trumpet player. And it was in a photo studio where Beyonce shot the Single Ladies video.
Oh,
So
cool.
you see it and you're like, I kind of recognize that place. And it's got, the skyline behind it and everything. And then you're hearing this, very traditional music. So it's really cool.
Oh, that's great.
So how do you, I mean, you're bringing in your own team of audio engineers. I assume you're kind of helping out with every single concert and trying to document it and record it, and maybe even produce some albums. Maybe we can get into that. But how are you and your team and or other teams kind of involved? And you must be there early and doing just tons of work.
Yeah. It's never a dull moment. We are recording every single concert with the goal of hopefully producing a recording that's high enough quality that it could be, a future
Commercial
album release or so at the very least we're archiving everything, but the goal is really to be able to use that material if, when that amazing special thing happens. It's so awesome to have that. So we're usually, we work 18, 20-hour days, some days where we load in the morning and we set up, and then we do 2 full concerts, which are wildly different. And then we load out and we're someplace else the next day. But it's built this real incredible team. I mentioned the 2 folks that I had. Molly and Maeve were there this year. They're both amazing former students of mine. And so they know the drill. And then I had another former student who is now the engineer for the Cleveland Orchestra, was able to help for a couple of days, which was awesome. And then we have some stage managers who have been with the festival for a number of years, so they really kind of know the drill and how to facilitate things and keep things really smooth for the audience that's there in person, but also to make sure, mics are getting moved and everybody's getting set up exactly where they were during rehearsal. And then along with that, we have a video crew that we bring in. Our director usually comes in from the Netherlands, from Amsterdam. He's with a company called Polycast, which is the video wing of Polyhymnia Records, big recording company. But basically everybody has been there before. We maybe add a person or 2 who's new each year, and it kind of keeps, things fresh. And then they come back and, somebody gets a great gig and they're not able to take time off during the summer, whatever it is. So it's this really cool sort of family vibe, which is awesome.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of a technical question. There's I think a lot of people don't realize what difference is between doing, kind of a sound reinforcement, trying to, make sure that the audience can hear something versus trying to capture audio for a recording. And those can contradict each other at times.
Yes.
What kind of steps, or what do you do to try to fight or meet that balance?
Yeah, that is a deep question. We're, to some extent, especially for the more traditional shows, we're pretty lucky where the only sound reinforcement might be some speaking, so it's a couple of wireless mics and we take a split for the recording and everything's easy. But especially for more contemporary shows where there might be electronics or there might be amplification. One year there was a bunch of toy piano stuff that needed to be amplified, or certainly jazz shows. A lot of work goes into figuring out what's going to work well for everybody. And sometimes it means even doubling up, because we sort of oversee sound reinforcement. If some venues, we provide all that ourselves as a part of my team. In other venues, there's a house person, so I sort of work with them. But there are times where, sound reinforcement can't really handle a certain microphone. It's a little too prone to feedback or a little too sensitive. And so we might even double up mics on a certain instrument because the recording just needs something different. But that has been a constant challenge for the
So
festival.
I have a question technically on that, because I'm not on the same page as you two. So let's say you have an instrument, I don't know, a saxophone, whatever, and it needs some amplification. You might have one mic there that's going to amplify it for the speakers in the house so that the audience can hear it, but you'll have another mic on that's going to be picked up by the audio engineers for the recording. It's a different kind of quality. Is that what you're talking about? And are you not going to get feedback on the speaker sound from like maybe you have two mics or something way in the back? I'm just envisioning something. I don't know where the setup is. That's going to pick up some of that, and you're going to have some cross like sounds or.
Yeah, you brought up an excellent point. So maybe that saxophone has a clip-on mic that works really well for amplification because it's always in the exact same spot and it's nice and tight. But maybe for the recording, we put a mic further back. So in that case, I might take a copy of the clip-on mic because it's easy for me to record one more track, but the sound reinforcement engineer wouldn't take any of that further mic. But then where things get really interesting, and I think what you're hitting on is even if there are 6 mics for amplification, usually there's 12 or 15 for recording because there'll probably be some mics hung. And that becomes interesting where if I'm hanging a couple of mics to kind of capture the overall ensemble sound or to get a little bit of the audience, then I have to position those mics so that the loudspeakers that are amplifying aren't just blasting right into the microphones. So then mic choice gets really difficult, and you're kind of like, playing with angles. You almost have a protractor out, and you're kind of like, 3 degrees to the left, and I think we'll get it. And, and it becomes really touchy. It's kind of crazy.
No, it is hard with a recording, especially if you're doing a large group, especially in a live setting. Trying to get that feel of it being live and yet having kind of the quality that we expect from a professional recording is really difficult.
Yeah. It's one of the toughest ones we've ever done is we did kind of a medium-sized big band. I want to say there were maybe 3 saxes, 2 trombones, 2 trumpets, piano, guitar, bass, drums. I think that's a vocalist on a couple of tracks. And like, that's a lot for either recording or for sound reinforcement. And then trying to like prioritize, and at that time it was especially critical because we were sort of maxing out the number of mics we had as well at the time. So it was like, okay, what can we get away with here? What can we get away with here? And obviously the piano and the singer are going to be critical. So we need to kind of bump the priority level up on them versus maybe bass trombone or guitar, and so it becomes a real balancing act. And thankfully, technology has grown even so much in the last 5 years, 7 years, I guess is about when that was, 6 years ago, something like that, that most of what we do now is all audio transmitted over internet protocol or network connection. So as long as every system speaks the same flavor of network, we can plug everything in one place, and then sound reinforcement and recording can just choose what they want off the same network.
Wow.
So are you doing that like over Cat 5?
Yeah. So I run
so cool.
300-foot Cat 5 cable, and half the time I'm on a different floor, or theoretically, I could be out in a truck on the street, or whatever it needs to be. And then I just run that one long cable, and really, if I wanted to go fancier, with, it's all commercial kind of standard network equipment. So there are modules that you can convert it all to 10 gigabit fiber lines as well. And then you can run thousands of feet with no loss.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's super cool.
So I only know of Cat 5, and that took me a second to process because, again, you guys, this is your lingo. But I think when I was wiring up my house, which I haven't finished, for getting, hardwire into this far room, I think I bought like Cat 7s cables. I mean, what's Cat 5 is enough? Could you go up to Cat 8? Would it make a difference? Or would you just go to these the cables you mentioned that are.
Well, so that's a really interesting question. So basically, all of those category cables, that's just kind of the general nomenclature they've taken on. Every grade higher, so like there's even Cat 5 and Cat 5e, and then there's Cat 6 and Cat 6a, and all these iterations. Basically, every time a new version comes out, it's a cable that's capable of transmitting a higher data rate. So it's, maybe you can transmit 1 megabit. That's really common for people, or 1 gigabit. Sorry. That's really common for people to talk about, in kind of home internet standards. Well, Cat 5e pretty much maxes out at 1 gigabit. Once you start going above 1 gigabit, which would matter for video especially, or for really big audio systems, or you think about you're putting in an entire building's network. Now every person at their desk has 1 gigabit. So now you need 100 gigabits of total bandwidth. So now you need these. It's kind of funny. They're basically thicker and less flexible is what the practical effect is. But yeah, they all transmit higher and higher data rates.
Bigger spools.
Yeah, more expensive.
Right.
But yeah, it's the funny thing is, video cares a ton. They're like, oh, we need Cat 6 or Cat 7 or whatever. Audio is pretty minuscule compared to video. I can run a Cat 5e cable and I'm fine.
Right. You can, tons of channels on that.
Yeah. I think I should be able to do 128 channels pretty easily on a single Cat 5 line. So if we had 128 channels at the festival, I'm already pulling my hair out. So
yeah.
I mean, just having that is so convenient. Just having that all running through one line is just such a change from before.
Well, and for people building new venues or designing venues or studios or broadcast facilities, now they wire the entire building up with this very standard, relatively low cost cable. And today it's the audio guys using it, and tomorrow the video guys using it, and the lighting guys using one port and audio's using another. And it's so flexible. Like all of these little specialty connectors and equipment standards and whatever, once you move into this wonderful world of everything is data, it's really easy.
Everything is ones and zeros now.
Yep. Why treat them differently?
Wow. So talk about I know that there was kind of a focus or a theme that was going on for the festival this year. You want to talk a little bit about that? Yeah.
Well, so this year the theme was, oh my God, I can't believe we're all together again. And it really did. It really did.
Hallelujah.
So giddy.
It was like, sort of people crying. They were so happy to see each other, so much of the team, especially, the operations director has been with the festival for 12 years. I mean, she knows every single person, and we're all friends and we all miss each other. And so this year's festival was, the two kind of tandem themes were together again. And also, that implies, the current situation, but also there was a big focus on Felix and Fanny Mendelssohn, because they were such an incredible storied relationship in music. And there's so much writing that they did to each other, both about music and about the world, and all these historical documents that are a really interesting narrative. But we also brought out some material from 2019, the last time we had an in-person festival, which was heavily focused on Clara Schumann. And she was kind of a groundbreaker as far as females in the classical music composition world. And so the festival always commissions new works and gets new compositions to perform. But that year they selected 10 female composers that were sort of inspired by or took cues from Clara Schumann. So this year we released an album of, I believe it was 5 or 6 compositions from that Clara Schumann 10 group of composers. So all female composers, all new works, all inspired by Clara. So it's called 200 Degrees to Clara.
Oh,
And
cool.
yeah, it's very cool, and it's all live, so it's kind of exciting. It's, you hear people applauding and getting excited, and it's very cool.
Hey, Elias, maybe you can give kind of put it on the spot a little bit, but can you give us a little background, Clara? Who was she, and
So finally, something I know what's going on.
I thought I'd bring you in somehow.
I'm just listening to this cat that. I love cats. Oh, are we talking about audio equipment?
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I'm glad you mentioned. I just showed my class at school this year. I try to bring in, different female composers and artists and performers and different ethnic backgrounds, just to introduce kids that I have in my school to seeing like, oh, this person could create as well. And the last one we did was Fanny and Felix.
Awesome.
And there was a piece recently, rediscovered. There was a piece that was written and it was attributed to Felix. I don't remember the name of the piece, but then like within the last decade, I think some musicologists had uncovered something about the manuscript that it was written in and saw that the paper or the watermarks or something, I don't know. It was from a manuscript that Fanny had actually written, that everybody knew Fanny had written. And somehow that a couple pieces of paper had gotten lost, whatever. They said, oh, actually Fanny wrote this, but it ended up with Felix's papers or whatever, and it was published as his. But then they performed it again under her name, and that was, I think, the first time in 100 some odd years that it was performed under the composer's name. So that's, it's interesting. We think of these people as long dead, and I mean they are, and what is Fanny is from? Let's see, Felix is 1809. Fanny was 1805. I should have looked this up, but anyway, they 150, 200 years later, we're realizing who wrote what. And like you said, they wrote to each other letters, and they would ask each other advice about certain pieces that they were working on. And they were both fantastic performers themselves, both child prodigies, really. But in that day, women were not encouraged. In fact, there are some letters, I guess back then parents wrote letters to their kids, which we think is so odd. But there are a couple letters from Papa Mendelssohn, like their father, to Fanny, saying, it's great that you love music, but really this should be for your brother. It's his profession. You really need to go into what women should go into, which is becoming a housewife. And it's weird to read that now. Of course, he was still supportive and loved her and wanted to give her the best education, but it was like, yeah, but you're just not going to make it in this world. And partly, I can't blame him too much because that's the world he grew up in. And so she fought against that a lot. And only after I think her father died, did she start composing and writing things under her name. I think Mendelssohn published a couple things under his name that were hers, but they were alluded to, like she wrote these. I think Schumann did too, Robert, for Clara. That there are a couple pieces of songs where he wrote 6 of the 9 and she wrote 3 of the 9, something like that. And they were published under his name, but it was known that she composed 3 of them, and they're quite good. And certainly there was influence back and forth. She was one of the greatest concert pianists. This is Clara Schumann of the day, and heavily influenced, Liszt and Chopin and Brahms. And there's that whole other story with Brahms, So these were major figures, and I'm just giving a very brief overview, but wonderful, powerful women that really, like you say, they were trailblazers. So hopefully people will listen to more of that, and I'd love to get a copy of that, or we'd love to listen to that CD that you produce.
Yeah. It really is. We live in such a strange time where it's easy to forget that things, not that we don't still have work to do on equality and making sure everyone is treated equally, but it's crazy, 200 years ago 200 years and change, years ago when Clara Schumann was born, like you said, you can play the music, but there's no way you can write it, and you couldn't be a conductor.
Yeah.
And you couldn't, it's not that long ago. That's really recently that people were facing that. And so it's I think it's good to remember these people who really, sort of smacked the world upside the head and said, hey, we can do this
Listen.
just as well as anyone else.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And they
think
did.
I remember in music history learning about Hildegard von Bingen because
Yes.
I barely knew in high school who Clara. I don't even think I knew Clara Schumann or Fanny Mendelssohn. Maybe I heard the names, and it was just like, oh, there are females that wrote music. Oh, really? Okay, I've never heard of them. I just know Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. And
Yeah.
then I remember learning Hildegard von Bingen from, I don't know, 1500s. Like, what? They were allowed also. And actually, she was quite famous in her day and age. And that was, an inspiration for a lot of later women to compose. And it's amazing. And how they get suppressed, but somehow they still live on. And there are so many great female composers today.
Well, it's a tribute to their greatness. It's a tribute to how good the music is. That it's hung on, that it's been remembered, that we still want to hear it today.
There's no way, like, it's kind of almost a trope now in every Hollywood movie about overcoming adversity, but it's when you're in that position, you have to be not only as good as everyone else, but you have to be so much better that no one can even question your achievement. And that's, Clara and Fanny and Hildegard, just incredible music, phenomenal.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well,
So
I want to listen to that.
Yeah, it was a fun album. Augusta Reed Thomas did
she's
a
awesome.
new piece, and just gorgeous. It's all strings, and it's this just kind of haunting piece called Clara's Ascent. And then there's a piece also with it's our first release with choir. There's a piece with Ghostlight Chorus based in New York, along with string section and soloists from the festival. And actually our first release that has solo voice as well. So there's some soprano piano work and soprano and small ensemble work as well. So it's all really, really cool stuff.
Well, and you're mentioning off air about a specific piece that is pretty crazy, pretty wild.
Yes. Bina Kim wrote, it's a 3-movement work called Stacked Emotion, and it's wild. So Ghostlight Chorus was on that piece, and they had a real time getting that under their belt. It was not easy music, and it's also with chamber orchestra, and there's a solo pianist as well, sort of a piano feature, and it was a monumental undertaking. I mean, just very challenging music, and it really came off so well. And actually, there's a moment where there's a huge jump musically, jump in the soprano part of the choir, and that became like the sound logo of one of the virtual festivals that the music festival put out over the pandemic. It's this
cool.
really iconic sort of exposed vocal part that's just gorgeous. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
That's cool. And talk, like, if somebody wants to hear that, where would they pick up that album? How would they find that?
So it is, it's currently a digital release only. So it's available on Apple Music, Spotify, and Amazon Music, as well as some of the other distributors. But it's on the big three. So if you search for 200 degrees, the degree symbol, due as in due north, DUE, Clara, that should get you there. Or you can search for Ken David Mazur. He conducted all the pieces that had a conductor. Trying to think who else you could search for. You could search for the Chelsea Music Festival strings.
And you know what? Here's what I'll do. Yeah. I'll find the link and I'll just put it in the description as well.
Oh, awesome! Yeah. I'll send you all the good stuff then, for sure.
That'd be good. So you can just find it at andifloveremains.com. I guess this is going to be, I think, episode 103.
Wow!
Yeah, wild. So you can find that information there and go check out. It's always exciting to hear new music. That's always just a wonderful thing. I wanted to ask you also, like, it's so bizarre in some ways. the pandemic has kind of opened up this new virtual world, which has been exciting in some ways, but also we've craved this live environment and being able to do. Do you think now that things like virtual festivals and things like that have taken place, do you think some of that will continue, or how do you think that will be incorporated in different live events?
Yeah, I think the takeaway, at least all the organizations that I work with, the takeaway they've kind of come away from the last 2 years with is, even if you don't love it, you still got to be present online, and things like live streaming, or at least recording and releasing highlights or things like that. I don't think that's ever going to go away.
Yeah.
There was a very kind of hard dichotomy in the music industry before the pandemic, where there were groups that did that put out material for free or live streamed things, and there were groups that didn't. And now I think the only groups that are still around are the ones that will continue to do that. I mean, I think it really was that harsh during the pandemic, is, groups that had never considered digital media now are really in that game, whether they like it or not.
Right.
But at the same time, I feel like, at least what I'm seeing here locally, is audiences they're kind of burnt out on staring at a screen.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing people who are pretty cautious, over the last 6 or 8 or 9 months, that maybe weren't ready to venture back out to a live event. Those people are starting to come back. They're just the trade-off of the risk where we're at now with vaccines and boosters and whatnot. They feel comfortable where it's worth it to them for the risk to actually be live in the room and experience things the way they're used to. So I don't know. I don't know if that's universal for all arts organizations, but that definitely seems to be the trend here.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting in the classical world. I'm just trying to come up with a few names of people that have sort of made it that non-traditional route in the last decade, and there aren't many. And in the non-classical world, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm thinking of the band OK Go.
Yeah.
And I remember that they kind of just released a video, did well, and they released another, and suddenly they were a big hit. And I don't think they must have been playing some live shows, but I don't think they were getting big from live shows. They just struck it rich on the internet. And now
I know a friend who, they used to be in a band called Van Lady Love, and it was interesting. Like, their whole marketing strategy was to do live covers, or not live covers, excuse me, to do covers on YouTube to get, like, they didn't release any of their original stuff. It was just covers. But their whole idea was to try to get an audience. So then when they did release an original version, they had a built-in audience. It's just such a different way of thinking about, the marketing strategy of some of these bands.
Yeah. Well, that cover thing is really interesting, because the first two things that come to mind for me are, how about Johnny Cash covering a Trent Reznor tune?
Right.
And all of a sudden people, millennials, people who never had any connection with Johnny Cash are like, who's this guy? Like, I mean, he's been around making incredible music for a lot longer than you've been alive, but it was an entry to a whole new generation.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, it's wild, that route that you take to kind of connect with your audience. But when it comes to the media part in classical, one of the groups that I think about, well, two of the groups, the Berlin Philharmonic has had the virtual concert hall for, it's got to be close to 10 years now. I mean, it has been around for a while. It was very much a scaled release, but it's been around for a while. It was around a few years before the pandemic, so maybe not 10 years. But, so they sort of had this worldwide audience that was already used to seeing them in that format. Plus, they had the infrastructure and sort of the way to get that out. The other one I think about is the chamber orchestra, A Far Cry, that's based in Boston. They have been doing live streams, I don't know, probably 2 years before the pandemic, they were doing live streams of all their big shows. And so they also sort of had this audience that was already used to that.
Yeah.
So for them, as soon as they could all physically get back in the same room to play a show, even without an audience, they already had an audience that understood the format and was ready to accept it.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you can buy subscriptions to those things now. The Berlin Phil stuff. I mean, I think
It's
our
amazing.
school subscribed to that, and they make tons of money through that.
Yeah, and it's really high quality. I mean, it's hard for me to be sold on seeing an orchestra and not be in the room because it's such a powerful experience. Yeah. But when you watch that, it's a pretty good analog.
Well, and I will say, like, one of the things that I enjoy is going to the big screen and seeing some of these events that from time to time they'll have.
Yes,
they'll have an opera or something, but it's played on at the movie theater. Now, again, it's not exactly the same, but it's about as close as you're gonna get. In terms of having the big sound and the huge screen, larger than life. I mean, that I'd like to see a little bit more of that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah, the Met at the movies or whatever they called it.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting, we don't maybe necessarily need to get into that debate, but that's an interesting organization too, because they kind of went the other way during the pandemic. They basically shut down, which is such a bummer because they did have
the infrastructure,
an audience, and they did, obviously they weren't going to make as much money doing, movie theater broadcasts, and certainly not early on. That wasn't even an option. But I mean, they hurt through the pandemic partially because there's different economics between an orchestra and an opera. There's a lot more consumable and a lot more prep time and staging needed for an opera. But at the same time, it's those groups that dove in and figured out how to get music out there. They did a lot better in the long run.
Yeah, trying to stay viable any way you can.
Yeah. My friend who's in Cleveland said they spent millions in just rentals and staffing the first year of the pandemic to get every concert recorded with video, some with audience, some without, depending on which phase of the pandemic. And then they built their own sort of platform that they could offer to patrons. And it was a huge undertaking, but he also said now that's the expectation. It went from renting equipment to, okay, we just need to buy this stuff because it's clear that we can't stop doing this once the cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, I wonder if this must have been, in a way, a boon for your field. Have you seen, I mean, it's cool when you're talking about reconnecting with your students, because now that you've been teaching for a while, it's, you're at the top in this game, and now you're having your own folks go around and spreading the Brett Leonard word of audio engineering. But, they must be excited that there are opportunities. Actually, are you seeing more people get into the field professionally?
It's a wild time right now in the field. As you mentioned, Mike, sort of at the top, there was this like everyone's in the studio if that's possible sort of scenario. A friend who worked at Sweetwater, he just retired, but he was working through the pandemic. He told me every day in 2020 after lockdown, he said every day has been like Black Friday.
Yeah.
He said if we could fill this place up 3 times a day, it'd still be gone by the end of the day.
Wow.
Like, just everyone was buying a guitar and buying a recording interface and buying a microphone because people wanted that. So the studio business, in a lot of ways, with the exception of maybe that 3 or 4 weeks of real uncertainty and lockdown, that picked up pretty quickly. But the live sound side of things is really interesting because a lot of people left the business. There was already an aging kind of top tier. There were a lot of people who were getting to the age where they didn't want to tour anymore, but they were really at the top of their game and getting paid incredible money. And they loved what they did, so they kept up with it. And for a lot of those people, the pandemic seemed to be the this is as good a sign as any that maybe I should be done.
Yeah.
And so now that we're back up and running, every single place I know that provides, system rental or touring support or whatever, man, if you walk in and even a little what you're doing, you'll be working every day. Like the demand is massive. So yeah, I think it's a pretty exciting time, and especially if you were able to pivot, if you were able to say to people, yeah, okay, I'm not a video person, but I can absolutely set up a few cameras and render this video while I'm recording you, and then you can release it as a virtual concert. Your sort of value to the client base really went through the roof.
That's awesome. It's good for student job placement. I mean, you can actually see them getting some opportunities, and that's what we all want as teachers. So.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's nothing but like it was really kind of a heartwarming feel this summer for me to have 3, students who I just absolutely love and adore. They're all fantastic people. They're all fantastic engineers. And to see them, they're in different places in the United States doing different things within the industry, but they're all working and doing well. And it's nothing beats that.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
I wanted to bring something up that's a little bit different topic because it's something that I wanted to ask you, Brett. So
yeah,
I was listening to he was a hip hop guy making beats, right? And it was interesting because he was talking about sampling and layering different samples. And what he said like kind of resonated with me from a standpoint of he said he stopped listening for what was like what sound was missing in a recording or in a layer that he was putting together, but he was more listening to what frequencies were missing and what frequencies like what was not here and not there. And so instead of listening for like a certain bass sound or a certain guitar riff or something like that, he was listening for like what would fill in that gap in his sample. And I thought about that as such an interesting concept of production, recording, like understanding what frequencies do to music and in fact, on the same subject, I had I was watching a video of the big octo basses that create that are an octave below the double bass and just these crazy frequencies that they can hit. They can hit tones that we can't hear, and how from a recording standpoint or from a production, even a live standpoint, like what are the things that you think about as far as like, trying to control or trying to enhance frequency, for an audience or for a listener?
Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of it depends on the music. The more dense the music, the more you really have to think about that. If you have, if I'm doing a jazz trio, it's like it kind of sorts itself out. The cymbals are on top, and the toms are in the lower mids, and the piano's sort of in the upper mid, and the kicks on and bass are sort of down low, and it builds itself. But it's something that as music has gotten more sonically complex, has really become an issue where you sort of have like all of these things that are competing for space, or you have a bunch of things that are lumped in one space and then there's nothing sort of adjacent to them. And so you have to start kind of stacking things. Okay, my bass guitar is going to be my synth bass is going to be the very lowest, and then there's going to be kick drum or 808 or whatever sort of bass drum type sample, and then there's going to be bass guitar or moving bass line, and then there's going to be maybe synth pads, and then there's going to be like a lead synth line, and then there's going to be vocals sitting above that, and then there's going to be a hi-hat sample and a shaker, and it's like you're creating a sandwich. You sort of you might know what one or two of those things are. Like, okay, I'm making a burger, so I know there's going to be a patty and there's going to be a bun. After that, it's what else am I putting in to fill this thing out? And it's really, I always think about Steely Dan as like a
Yes.
master class in this concept, because that is the most jam-packed musical sandwich you could ever find. There's so much going on, but every single element has its little space carved out.
Right. You can hear everything crystal clear.
Yeah, nothing fights each other. Like everything coexists and it has just its right little space, and it sits there and it does its thing. And if you want to focus on it, you can listen to every note. If you want to focus on something else, it doesn't get in the way. It's really fascinating.
Well, and people who understand, like yourself, like people who understand the human ear and how it works, it really is a benefit. Like, for example, I know when I tend to notice, like high end, you just need a little bit of high. You just need like those cymbals. You don't need a lot of them compared to a kick drum, for example. Like how we perceive those sounds are so different.
Yeah,
going to balance those out is just interesting to me.
well, it's the one of the most fun moments I have. I teach an introduction to music technology class, and it's one of my favorite classes to teach, if not my most favorite, because there's these light bulb moments throughout. And one of my favorite light bulb moments is when people realize that composers and musicians and conductors and songwriters are all working on the exact same problem as cognitive psychologists and audiologists and lab coat people studying sound. They're just working on the same problem from two ends.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I always talk about is, okay, you're going to build an orchestra. Okay, you're going to have tuba. It's a pretty loud instrument. You're going to have, let's say it's a big orchestra. You're going to have 10 basses, 10 big honking basses. And then you're going to have 12 cellos, big cello section. And then you're going to have 8 violas. Okay, you're not going to have quite as many. And you're going to have 10 or 12 second violins, 10 or 12 first violins. And you're going to have 1 piccolo. You're going to have 3 flutes. You're going to have 2 bassoons. And we sort of go through the instrumentation. And we map out where they are in the frequency range, like where's their sort of meat and potatoes frequency range.
Yeah.
And it maps almost perfectly to human hearing sensitivity. We need 10 basses playing loud to give us the energy that's equivalent to 1 piccolo playing mezzo forte.
Yeah.
Like it's people have been doing this stuff while they're writing music for way longer than people have been studying it as a science.
Yeah.
So people learned these things the hard way. Okay, well, I'm going to have 2 basses tonight. Oh, that didn't quite work. Maybe I should have 2 more.
Add another.
yeah. The add subtract orchestra standard. Until they got the right blend. Yeah. But it's really fascinating how music has developed to reinforce what we hear and how we hear it, to reinforce the psychoacoustics of things. And it's like there's no surprise when the psychoacoustics that like the hi-hat and the shaker do stuff together a lot, because they lock in and they form a single unit because they're close in frequency and they're close in timbre. So when they're playing the same rhythm, they form a new sound called the shaker hi-hat. Like it's a single unit because our ear groups them, versus if the shaker and the bass play the same rhythm, we still hear 2 very separate things.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's
It's interesting to think of composers, as you said, working on the same problem from a different angle. But, let's say 200-300 years ago, they had to work with whatever they got. So if Haydn was stuck at Palace, Esterhazy Palace, and, 3 of the musicians were sick and stuck at home and couldn't make it, and he had to write music for the prince or whatever. It's like, well, here are the musicians you have, so do something that I love with it. That's pretty amazing.
well, and Elias, I was actually thinking about like the piano and the Chopin or even Bach, like how creating those sounds, a fugue, for example, is in a way trying to create when you move up the fifth, to do that second voice, for example, maybe in the soprano line, like how you would play that differently than if you played that in the alto line. And all of those voicing techniques that we learn as pianists to make those things kind of come out and applying that to the room, applying that to the circumstance, and it's just the art of sound is really an interesting study.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think how the architecture too has, I mean, audio engineering as an actual science field hasn't been around super
Not long at all. Not long at all.
And then you think of some of these halls in Italy that were designed 200-300 years ago for the voice or whatever, and they just sound beautiful. The acoustics are amazing. And then you have some modern buildings built by sound engineers who are like, what the heck were you? I can't hear anything in here. And like, how did they design that back? I mean, the the artistic side element of the architecture, I think is pretty cool.
My favorite is there was that period, that sort of brutalist architecture period, and minimalism in architecture, where people kept building these concert halls with like super clean flat lines and hard surfaces, and they're like, I guess it kind of sounds okay, but it doesn't sound like this, like Esterhazy Palace. Why doesn't it work? And somebody finally figured out, like, hey, all those ornate carvings and like gold foil on everything, sure, it's maybe a little gaudy, but it actually breaks up the sound, and you just put a flat cement wall and expected it to do the same thing. Who'd have thought it,
That's so cool. Yeah,
that is really cool.
There's so much reverse engineering, I feel like, it's like some great composer, some great architect, some great musician figured something out hundreds of years ago, and now scientists are going like, okay, let's figure out why that worked. What about that was the magical formula?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's wild. It is. It's the why did that work, and how do we
still figuring it out?
Art, or is it or is it something that has to be rediscovered every generation?
Yeah. Well, the place where my students really start to hate me, though, is in that same class. Then if you go back a generation, even beyond like music that we would know and recognize and relate to now, it's all mathematicians and philosophers who are talking about music. And like, people are like, oh, I don't know why is it that the fifth is such a, harmonious interval in Western music? And you're like, well, if you go back to harmonics and the harmonics of a string, and, Pythagoras wrote this whole treatise on how strings vibrate. And like, if you look at that, that's actually lined up with what, and they're like, wait, what? So there's math behind all this? And I'm like, yes, the fifth isn't just in harmony because, I don't know, because magic. Like, there's actually a reason behind this. And that was too much math. Let's skip that part.
Yeah. I love talking about tunings with my students, or I show them. And actually, we just had our harpsichord. We have a harpsichord, and had a technician come over the other day, and he was talking about a couple different tunings that he uses and he knows. I'm just like, okay, I'm used to the even tempered thing on my piano, and already the harpsichord's at 415 instead of 440. Yep. And then he talked about the third being this or that, and I get that. I just don't know the names of the tuning systems or how they relate. And he said they did an experiment where a couple pianists went to some hall here in Phoenix, and maybe it was at ASU. Anyway, they tuned the concert grand to 440 with a standard even temperament tuning, and then they added a harpsichord or forte piano at 415 at a different kind of tuning or something like that. Or maybe they had two forte pianos at one even tempered and one at this other Kendall or whatever it's called. And a lot of people listening and the performers preferred that other tuning because the piece was kind of composed with that in mind. And so a lot of the intervals and the effects that were taken into account by the composer had that tuning, whereas our tuning is like superimposed, doesn't quite work.
If you hear the Chopin Funeral March in its original, the B minor in its original tuning, it is a different experience than hearing the temperament. It's different. It's so like foreboding. Oh man, I do want to die.
Well, even temperament, like, it's the ultimate compromise. We're like, well, I guess if everyone's going to use a different key, then I guess we have to make them all kind of the same amount of out of tune. Like, I work a lot with the Indianapolis Baroque Orchestra, which is phenomenal group, and really amazing players coming in from all over the country and all over the world, and they're amazing. But like, you have to retune after every piece, not only because of the instruments. The instruments are sort of don't support the same consistency, but if you shift to a different key, like now all of a sudden everything's going to be off, so you got to recenter yourself, and so it works great for one thing at a time. But it's our current tuning is like the democratization of error.
It is, yeah. I will say I've been really fascinated lately by a lot of the like the microtonal stuff, and like trying to like find the note in between the note, and try to find those colors that we do miss in and I think microtonal, some of those stuff can add some of those aspects back into music. Yeah.
There's so much. I mean, there's people with all these different whole musical systems, 16 tone and 17 tone and 23 tone and whatever. And it's really fascinating. And it's cool too, because for the first time ever, people can make these things without it requiring a literal monarch to support their endeavors and create this new instrument. Like, people can sit down and with Melodyne or a synthesizer, they can create this stuff and let people actually listen to it.
And you don't have to get a tuner, every time you want to change that up or learn how to, it's so much more complicated on real instruments than to just do it in your computer.
Yeah. Well, and even manufacturing tech, percussion is always an easy one to experiment with, because like, you just make more bars for your marimba or your xylophone or whatever. And now with CNC routers being so, stupid cheap comparatively, a couple $1,000, you could set yourself up and you can make a new xylophone every week if you had the money for.
That's true.
Wow.
So, I didn't think about that. That's really true.
Yeah. You can get it so close, and then you pull out your file and you just, dial it in perfectly to the frequency you want. And now you have your 23 tone octave, xylophone or vibraphone or whatever, which is super cool.
That is cool. Very cool.
That's amazing to think about. Well, that's our next project.
Next
time we're going to talk about microtonal.
Next time we're going to build a new xylophone. It's going to be great.
That's right.
Virtually.
Oh, man. Well, I gotta let you guys go. Time is running short, but I want to thank you, Brett. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, or anything that anything you'd like to add before?
No, this is always a blast. I'm so happy to talk to you guys again, and it's been too long. Anytime, you know where I'm at.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna do it.
Yeah. Thanks
Absolutely.
for coming on. It's awesome.
Yeah.
I never know where these are going to take us, but now I'm just like thinking about all these opportunities and ideas.
It's always fun, 3 different perspectives coming at the same thing. Fun stuff's always going to happen.
Absolutely. It's a smorgasbord of creativity coming in.
Love it.
Yeah. You guys are the best. Thank you so much, Elias, again, and Brett. I really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure.
My name is Mike Levitt, and you've been listening to And If Love Remains.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
First of 23 installments requested by Dr. Levitt. Trying to be in compliance here because we're taking him and that whole organization down.